The soup was still boiling when it left the bowl. It struck Sandra's chest like liquid fire, seeping through the black fabric of her uniform and scorching the skin beneath. The white apron offered no protection. Her cry tore through the exclusive restaurant, a raw, animal sound of agony that silenced the soft jazz playing overhead and stopped every fork mid-air. She collapsed against the marble floor, her hands frantically pulling at the steaming fabric as the heat continued to burn deeper, her vision blurring with tears she'd promised herself she'd never shed in public. And Jack Sterling was filming it. He loomed over her crumpled form, his phone angled perfectly to capture every second of her suffering. His grin stretched wide across his face, her eyes lit with the particular amusement of someone who'd never faced consequences for anything in his entire existence. That black Armani suit he wore cost more than Sandra's mother's chemotherapy treatments. The Patek Philippe on his wrist could have paid off the predatory loan threatening to evict her family from their apartment. And here he stood, documenting her pain like it was content for his private entertainment. "Maybe you'll think twice before breathing in my direction next time," he said, his voice dripping with mock concern as he zoomed in on her blistering skin. "You service people really need to learn your place. Stay small, stay quiet, stay invisible." The restaurant, an upscale establishment in the heart of the financial district, where a single appetizer cost a week of Sandra's wages, had become a tomb. The other servers pressed themselves against walls, eyes fixed on the imported tile floor, knowing that speaking up meant losing the jobs that kept their families fed. The wealthy diners suddenly discovered urgent messages on their phones, or fascinating details in the modern art hanging on exposed brick walls, performing the ancient ritual of the privileged, pretending they saw nothing. Because Jack Sterling was untouchable, the son of Malcolm Sterling, a trillionaire whose empire stretched from tech monopolies to pharmaceutical patents to private military contracts. A man whose lawyers had made assault charges disappear like smoke. A man whose wealth had long ago elevated his family beyond such tedious concepts as accountability or basic human decency. But at the corner table, something changed. A man in a charcoal suit set down his teacup with practiced precision. The motion was controlled, measured, the gesture of someone who had spent decades mastering the art of stillness before violence. Beside him, a massive black pit bull rose to its feet without a sound. No bark, no growl, just coiled muscle and predatory intelligence, its eyes locking onto Jack with the focus of something bred for war. The silver chain collar around its neck caught the ambient light like a promise. The man himself remained statue still, his face betraying nothing. But the intricate black tattoos crawling up his neck and disappearing beneath his collar seemed to pulse with their own dark energy. His hands, resting flat on the table, bore the faded scars of violence survived and violence delivered. His eyes, cold, calculating, like ancient, tracked every movement Jack made, processing angles, distances, vulnerabilities. Kang Seo had seen enough, and Jack Sterling, who thought his father's billions made him invincible, who thought poverty made people disposable, who thought cruelty was his birthright, had just signed his own destruction. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The silence shattered when Jack kicked Sandra's ankle as she tried to stand. She went down again, a sharp gasp escaping her lips as her burned chest hit the floor. The phone never stopped recording. "Did I say you could get up?" Jack's voice carried the casual authority of someone who'd been told yes his entire life. "I want a proper apology first. On your knees. Maybe then I'll consider not having you fired and blacklisted from every establishment in the city." He turned to address the frozen restaurant, playing to his invisible audience. "You all see this, right? This is what happens when the help forgets their station. My father owns half the commercial real estate in this district. One phone call and your father owns nothing. The voice cut through Jack's monologue like a blade through silk. It was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried a weight that made even the background music seem to lower in deference. Jack spun around, his phone finally dropping from Sandra's suffering to find the source. Kang Seo stood 15 feet away. He hadn't rushed over. He'd simply risen and walked with the unhurried gait of someone who controlled time itself. The pitbull moved with him, perfectly synchronized, a shadow given teeth and muscle. Up close, Kang Seo was even more imposing, not from height, though he had that, but from the absolute certainty radiating from his stillness. "Excuse me." Jack's confusion manifested as indignation. "Who the hell do you think you—" "Malcolm Sterling's empire," Kang Seo continued, his English flawless but touched with an accent that spoke of soul streets and blood-soaked alleys, "is built on shell corporations within shell corporations. 17 layers deep in some cases. Impressive. But the core, the foundation holding up all that pretend wealth?" He tilted his head slightly. "That belongs to creditors in Shanghai, silent partners in Moscow, and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands that could be frozen with a single phone call." Jack's face went pale. You don't know what you're talking about." "Trust Fund 4471-B. The one you think is yours?" Kang Seo's eyes never blinked. "It's leveraged against your father's defense contracts. Those contracts are currently under federal review for overcharging. When, not if, when, the audit's complete, that fund evaporates. You're not royalty, child. You're a creditor's bargaining chip who hasn't read the fine print." The restaurant had become a vacuum. Even the kitchen had gone silent. Jack's hand trembled as he pointed at Kang Seo. "My father will destroy you for this. Do you have any idea who you're threatening?" "I'm not threatening anyone." Kang Seo glanced down at Sandra, who was staring up at him with a mixture of pain and confusion. "I'm simply informing you that the young woman you assaulted has more inherent value than your entire bloodline. Oh, help her up, apologize, and perhaps I'll forget I witnessed this." "Fuck you!" Jack's face twisted with rage. "I don't apologize to the help, and I definitely don't take orders from some tattooed thug with a dog." He pulled out his phone again, fingers flying. "I'm calling my father's lawyers right now. You're done, you're—" The pitbull growled then. It was a sound from the prehistoric depths of pack law and territorial warnings, a frequency that bypassed the brain and spoke directly to the brainstem's terror receptors. Jack froze mid-dial, his fingers locked on the screen. "His name is Phantom," Kang Seo said quietly. "He was trained to eliminate armed combatants in Kandahar before the U.S. military decided he was too aggressive and scheduled his euthanasia. I saved him 3 hours before the injection. So he understands 27 commands in Korean, English, and Pashto. But the one he's waiting for right now?" Kang Seo's eyes went colder. "That one has no language, just intention." Jack stumbled backward, his designer shoes slipping on the marble. "This is assault. This is you leaving," Kang Seo said. "Now." For the first time in his entitled existence, Jack Sterling obeyed someone other than his father. He backed toward the door, his phone clutched to his chest like a talisman that had failed him. At the threshold, he found his voice again. "You have no idea what you just started. My father owns people like you." "Your father," Kang Seo replied, already kneeling beside Sandra to examine her burns, "has never owned anyone like me." The door slammed, the restaurant exhaled, and Kang Seo, with hands surprisingly gentle for someone who had tattoos commemorating every life he'd taken, carefully helped Sandra to her feet. "We need to get you to a hospital," he said. Sandra's voice came out hoarse. "I can't afford—" You won't need to. Kang Seo sat in the hospital waiting room, Phantom's head resting on his knee, and remembered another burn victim from another life. Busan, 1989. He'd been 12 years old, watching his mother's restaurant burn, while the loan sharks who'd set the fire laughed from across the street. His mother had survived, but her hands, the hands that had made the best kimchi jjigae in the district, never worked properly again. The police report called it an electrical fire. The insurance company denied the claim. And young Kang Seo learned the fundamental truth of the world. Money wasn't just power. It was permission to commit violence without consequence. He'd joined the Korean Special Forces at 17, lying about his age. He was good at it. Too good. By 23, he'd completed operations in places that didn't officially exist, eliminating threats that weren't officially acknowledged. He'd believed in it then. The honor, the code, the idea that there were clear lines between righteousness and evil. Then came the mission to Los Angeles, a joint task force hunting an arms dealer. They'd found him, captured him, turned him over to their American partners. 2 weeks later, the same arms dealer was released on a technicality, back in business, and 3 of Kang Seo's team were dead in a retaliatory strike. The dealer's lawyer? Paid for by a tech billionaire who needed those weapons for his private security contractors. That's when Kang Seo understood. The American dream was real, but it wasn't for everyone. It was a members-only club with a velvet rope and a bouncer who only checked one credential: how much money you could spend to make problems disappear. He'd left the military. Not officially. Officially, he'd died in a training accident. The body they buried was someone else's. Kang Seo had already disappeared into Los Angeles' Koreatown, building a different kind of empire. One that operated in shadows. One that understood money was ammunition and information was artillery. For 30 years, he'd built it carefully. Legitimate businesses that generated real revenue. Restaurants, real estate, import/export. And underneath, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look, the machinery of the underworld. Protection services, information brokerage, and financial engineering that could redirect millions through jurisdictions with no extradition treaties. He told himself it was justice, a counterbalance to people like the arms dealer, people like Malcolm Sterling, people who bought their way out of consequences while working-class mothers lost their hands to fires set by creditors. People who raised sons to pour boiling soup on waitresses for entertainment. The doctor emerged from the emergency room, pulling off her gloves. "Are you family?" "I'm paying," Kang Seo said, which was the only family that mattered in hospitals. Second-degree burns across her chest and shoulder. We've treated and bandaged them, but she'll need to stay overnight for observation. There's also the matter of... The doctor hesitated. She mentioned she has a younger brother. She was worried about him. She kept asking if we could call him, but she didn't have his number. She seemed distressed about it. Kang Seo's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. What did she say exactly? That he'd been gone for 3 months. That the last time she saw him, he was being recruited for a construction job overseas. Good pay, housing included, all expenses covered. But he never called. And when she tried to follow up with the company, it didn't exist. Phantom's ears perked up, sensing the change in his master's heartbeat. What was the company name? Kang Seo asked quietly. Sterling Global Solutions. The journalist's name was Maria Chen, and she'd been investigating corporate malfeasance for 15 years. She'd exposed senators, CEOs, and once, memorably, an entire pharmaceutical company that had been selling saline solution as cancer medication. She was thorough, incorruptible, and perpetually 1 story away from a Pulitzer. She was also in debt up to her eyeballs from legal fees defending herself against defamation suits, and her editor had just killed her latest investigation for being, too risky. When she received the encrypted email with an untraceable sender, her first instinct was to delete it. Her second instinct, the one honed by years of following leads that smelled wrong until they smelled right, made her open it instead. The files inside detailed 30 years of tax evasion by Malcolm Sterling. Not the simple offshore account variety, the complex kind, the brilliant kind. The kind where charitable foundations funded political campaigns, so where losses were manufactured through Byzantine corporate structures, where shell companies purchased real estate from other shell companies to generate deductible expenses that existed only on paper. It was airtight, sourced, cross-referenced, the kind of evidence that prosecutors dreamed about and defense attorneys had nightmares over. The final file was a video. Malcolm Sterling in a private meeting with 3 senators, discussing payment schedules for favorable legislation. The audio was crystal clear. The video was time-stamped and metadata confirmed as authentic. At the bottom of the email, a single line. The son learned his cruelty from somewhere. Perhaps it's time the teacher faced the lesson. Maria Chen stared at her screen for 10 minutes, and then she opened a new document and titled it, The Sterling Empire, How America's Newest Trillionaire Built His Fortune on Fraud. By morning, the story would break. By afternoon, federal investigators would have enough to begin raids. By evening, Malcolm Sterling's stock portfolio would begin the first death spiral. But Kang Seo was already 3 moves ahead. The warehouse was in San Pedro, tucked between legitimate shipping containers and forgotten infrastructure. It didn't appear on any official maps. The security was minimal. 2 cameras, both conveniently angled away from the north entrance, and a single guard who took his smoke breaks with religious regularity at 2 a.m. Kang Seo and Phantom waited in the darkness until the guard's lighter flared. Then they moved. Phantom went low and silent, more the military training overriding every instinct to bark or announce. Kang Seo went through the door like smoke, his lockpicks making short work of the mechanism that was meant to keep out casual trespassers, not professionals. Inside, the warehouse was partitioned into sections. The front held legitimate imports, electronics, textiles, nothing remarkable. But in the back, behind a false wall that Kang Seo's intelligence had identified, was something else entirely. Cages. Not literal bars, but close enough. Sleeping quarters crammed with bunk beds, 40 people where 10 should fit. A single bathroom. No windows. The people inside were young, mostly men, mostly immigrants, who'd been promised work visas and good wages. Instead, they'd gotten debt bondage, their passports confiscated, their wages garnished for housing fees and processing costs until the numbers on paper said they owed more than they'd ever make. Modern slavery with a corporate logo. Kang Seo found Sandra's brother in the 3rd row of bunks, Marcus, 19 years old. He'd lost 20 pounds since his recruitment, and his eyes had the hollow look of someone who'd stopped believing rescue was possible. "Your sister sent me," Kang Seo said quietly in the darkness. Marcus stared at him. "Sandra, is she? She's safe, and you're leaving. They took our passports. They said if we run, they'll have us deported. They said..." They lied. Kang Seo pulled out his phone and took photos of everything. The conditions, the people, the documents he found in the supervisor's office that detailed the entire operation. Sterling Global Solutions was a subsidiary of a subsidiary of a subsidiary, but the trail led back to Malcolm Sterling's empire eventually. It always did. "Everyone's leaving. Tonight." "There are 40 of us," Marcus whispered. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere safe." Kang Seo had already arranged it. A church in Koreatown that didn't ask questions, run by a pastor who understood that sometimes salvation required breaking the law. "Phantom, watch the door." The pitbull positioned himself at the entrance, perfectly still, except for the subtle rotation of his ears, tracking every sound in the building. It took 30 minutes to wake everyone, explain the situation, and get them organized. Some were skeptical. Strangers promising rescue usually meant different exploitation. But Marcus vouched for Kang Seo, and Sandra's name carried weight. When she'd been kind to several of them during the recruitment process, warning them to read contracts carefully. They hadn't listened then. They'd listen now. The guard was still on his smoke break when the group slipped out into the Los Angeles night. Kang Seo had arranged trucks, 6 of them, unmarked, driven by men who'd once been in similar situations and now worked in his legitimate businesses. Men who understood debt paid forward. As the last truck pulled away, Kang Seo stood in the empty warehouse with Phantom and uploaded the photos to an encrypted server. By morning, Immigration and Customs Enforcement would receive an anonymous tip with GPS coordinates and evidence too detailed to ignore. The raid would happen within 48 hours. Malcolm Sterling's stock price, already dropping from Maria Chen's exposé, would crater another 15% when the human trafficking charges hit. But Kang Seo wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and made a call. It was answered on the first ring. "It's time," Kang Seo said. "Send Jack Sterling a message, something he'll remember." On the other end of the line, someone laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. The markets opened at 6:30 a.m. Pacific time, and by 6:32, Malcolm Sterling's world began its controlled demolition. Maria Chen's article had gone live at midnight, meticulously timed to hit every major news cycle from East Coast morning shows to West Coast evening broadcasts. By dawn, it was the top story on every financial network, every business publication, every platform that tracked the movement of serious money. But the article was just the spark. Kang Seo had spent the previous evening orchestrating the real inferno. He sat in his private office above a restaurant in Koreatown, watching 6 monitors display real-time market data. Phantom lay at his feet, sleeping the light sleep of a weapon at rest. On the screens, Sterling Industries' stock price flickered and plunged like a birdshot mid-flight. The algorithm Kang Seo had commissioned from a former NSA cryptographer began executing its sequence. It wasn't illegal, technically. It was aggressive short-selling combined with strategic limit orders that created the appearance of mass institutional divestment. Other traders, seeing what looked like major players abandoning ship, followed suit. Panic fed panic. The herd mentality took over. Within 20 minutes, Sterling Industries had lost 8% of its value. Then the human trafficking story broke. ICE had raided the San Pedro warehouse at dawn, finding it empty of workers, but full of evidence. The photos Kang Seo had taken were already in the hands of prosecutors. The connection to Sterling Global Solutions was established within hours by journalists who smelled blood in the water. The stock dropped another 7%. Kang Seo made 3 phone calls. The first was to a venture capital firm in Singapore that held significant Sterling Industries bonds. He provided them with information about upcoming EPA violations at Sterling's chemical plants, information that was accurate because Kang Seo had paid the inspectors not to warn Sterling in advance. The bonds were dumped within the hour, and the second call went to a pension fund manager in Oslo who'd been trying to divest from problematic companies but lacked the ammunition to justify it to his board. Kang Seo provided that ammunition in the form of documents showing Sterling's defense contracts included weapons sold to regimes currently under international sanctions. The pension fund issued a public statement of divestment by lunch. The third call was to Malcolm Sterling's own head of security, a man named Vincent Corso, who'd been on Kang Seo's payroll for 6 years and was very tired of cleaning up after Jack's incidents. "It's done," Vincent said without preamble. "The old man's in full panic mode. He's trying to liquidate assets to cover the margin calls, but the banks smell blood. They're calling in loans early." The whole house of cards is swaying. And his son? Locked in his penthouse. Malcolm thinks if Jack stays out of sight, the story loses its human interest angle. Vincent paused. He's wrong, isn't he? Yes, Kang Seo said. He's very wrong. By market close, Sterling Industries had lost 15.3% of its value. $7 billion had evaporated. It wasn't enough to destroy Malcolm Sterling. Not yet. But it was enough to wound him, to make him desperate, to make him make mistakes. Kang Seo was counting on it. Jack Sterling's penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building his father owned in Century City. The security was military grade, biometric locks, pressure sensors in the floor, cameras covering every angle, and 2 former Secret Service agents rotating shifts at the private elevator. None of it mattered, so Jack woke at 3 a.m. to find a single black hair on his pillow. It was coarse, unmistakably canine, and placed with surgical precision directly beside his face, where he couldn't miss it. Beneath it was a note written in precise handwriting on expensive cardstock. This is only the beginning. Jack's scream brought the security team running, but they found nothing. No signs of entry. No breaches in the camera feeds. The pressure sensors showed no additional weight had entered the apartment. The biometric locks had no unauthorized access attempts logged. The hair and the note were impossible, and they were right there. How the hell did someone get in here? Jack's voice cracked as he clutched the note, his hands shaking. We're 42 floors up. The windows don't even open. The head of security thought a man named Rogers, who'd protected diplomats in Kabul, examined every inch of the penthouse. He found nothing. His partner checked the exterior. No rope marks, no drone signatures on the building's radar, no evidence of climbing equipment. Sir, Rogers said carefully, is it possible you brought this in yourself? Maybe picked it up somewhere and forgot? I know what a freaking dog hair looks like. Jack hurled his phone at the wall. And I didn't write myself a threatening note. But the real terror wasn't the breach. It was what it meant. Someone who could penetrate his security could do anything. Could be here right now, hidden in walls or vents, or places Jack's mind couldn't conceptualize. Could be waiting for the moment when the guards left and Jack was alone and vulnerable. The tattooed man from the restaurant, and the one with the pit bull, the one who'd known things about the trust fund that even Jack barely understood. Jack called his father at 3:47 a.m. Malcolm Sterling answered on the 6th ring, his voice rough with expensive scotch and stress. It's falling apart, Jack said, trying to sound like the heir to an empire instead of a terrified child. The stock, the investigations, everything. We need to fix this. We need to make it go away like we always do. We? Malcolm's laugh was bitter. This is your mess, Jack. You and your crazy phone and your need to humiliate the help. I've spent 30 years building this empire, and you're pissing it away because you couldn't keep your sadism private. That waitress, Jack said, Sandra, if she just went away, if she had an accident or disappeared, the story loses its sympathetic angle. People forget. The stock recovers. We can make it happen, Malcolm said quietly. The shift in his tone was immediate, from frustrated father to calculated executive. She's still in the hospital? I think so. I can find out. Do that. I'll make some calls. The line went dead. Jack stared at his phone, at the cracked screen from where he'd thrown it, at the dog hair still resting on his pillow like an accusation. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. Sandra woke at 4 a.m. to a nurse she'd never seen before, checking her IV. The nurse was efficient, professional, wearing scrubs that looked slightly too new. She smiled when Sandra's eyes opened, the kind of practiced smile that healthcare workers perfected to soothe anxious patients. Just checking your drip, the nurse said. How are you feeling? Tired, Sandra managed. The painkillers made her thoughts slow, But something about the nurse seemed wrong. Too smooth, too careful with her movements. "That's normal. I'm going to adjust your medication. You'll feel better soon." The nurse reached for the IV line, her fingers working quickly to inject something into the port. Sandra's mind screamed at her to react, but her body was too heavy, too slow. The burns on her chest throbbed with each heartbeat. Then Phantom was in the room. Sandra didn't see him enter. One moment the doorway was empty. The next, it was filled with 100 pounds of muscle and controlled aggression. The pitbull didn't bark. There was no warning. He simply crossed the room in 3 bounds and placed himself between Sandra's bed and the nurse, his teeth visible, a low rumble emanating from his chest that promised violence. The nurse stumbled backward, her hand jerking away from the IV. The syringe she'd been holding clattered to the floor. Kang Seo materialized in the doorway, as if he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "You should run," he said to the nurse. "Right now. Very fast." The woman looked at Kang Seo, then at Phantom, then back at Kang Seo. Whatever she saw in his eyes made her decision. She ran. Kang Seo picked up the syringe with a latex glove he pulled from his pocket. He held it up to the light, examining the amber liquid inside. "Potassium chloride," he said calmly. "In large doses, causes cardiac arrest. Looks like natural causes in autopsy reports, unless someone knows to look for it specifically." Sandra's chest tightened. Not from the burns now, but from the realization of what had almost happened. They tried to kill me. Yes. Jack Sterling, his father. Yes. "Why are you here?" The question came out as a whisper. "Why are you protecting me?" Kang Seo set the syringe on the medical tray and pulled a chair to her bedside. Phantom settled at his feet, still alert, still guarding. 36 years ago, I watched my mother's hands burn because powerful men decided her life was less valuable than their profit margin. I couldn't stop them then. I was 12 and powerless. His eyes met hers. I'm not powerless anymore. What are you going to do? What I should have done at the restaurant. Kang Seo stood, his movements deliberate. I'm going to finish this. He pulled out his phone and made a single call. When someone answered, he spoke 3 words in Korean. Sandra didn't understand the language, but she understood the tone. It was the voice of a man who just declared war. Within the hour, 2 things happened simultaneously. The first was that Sandra was transferred to a private facility in Koreatown, protected by men who treated Kang Seo like a general, and Phantom like a weapon of mass destruction. The second was that Jack Sterling vanished from his 42nd floor penthouse, despite 2 armed guards and a security system that was supposed to be impenetrable. Jack woke in darkness to the smell of oil and concrete, and something organic decomposing in corners his eyes couldn't see. His head throbbed where something had struck him. He didn't remember what. The last thing he recalled was stepping out of the shower in his penthouse, reaching for a towel, and then nothing. Now he was here. Wherever here was, his hands were zip-tied to a metal chair. His feet were bound. He was still wearing the expensive silk boxer shorts he'd gone to bed in, but nothing else. The concrete floor was cold against his bare feet. A light clicked on above him, industrial and harsh. Jack squinted against it, trying to see beyond the circle of illumination. He could make out shapes, stacked pallets, a forklift in one corner, high ceiling crisscrossed with pipes and ventilation. A warehouse. He was in a freaking warehouse. "Help!" His voice echoed off metal walls. "Someone help me! I'm Jack Sterling. My father will pay anything. Just let me go and—" "Your father," a voice said from the darkness, "is currently learning that his personal attorney has been providing federal investigators with documents for the past 6 months in exchange for immunity." Kang Seo stepped into the light. Saw he was dressed the same as always. Perfect charcoal suit, impeccable despite the industrial setting. Phantom walked beside him, silent as death. Jack's bladder nearly let go. You did this. You've been doing all of this. Yes. Why? What did we ever do to you? Kang Seo pulled up a second chair and sat facing Jack, their knees almost touching. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. You poured boiling soup on a woman who was working 3 jobs to pay for her mother's cancer treatment. You filmed her suffering for entertainment. You exist in a world where money has made you believe that other people's pain doesn't matter. She's just a waitress, Jack's voice broke. She's nobody, and you're destroying my father's empire, kidnapping me, ruining everything for some nobody who... The slap came so fast Jack didn't see it. Now his head snapped to the side, his cheek blooming red. When he looked back, Kang Seo's expression hadn't changed. He'd struck Jack the way someone swats a mosquito, efficiently, without emotion. Let me tell you a story, Kang Seo said. When I was in the Korean Special Forces, we had a motto. First, do no harm to those who cannot defend themselves. It was borrowed from medicine, but it applied. We weren't executioners. We were protectors. He leaned back slightly. Then I came to America and learned that your country's motto is different. Here, it's, do whatever you can afford to get away with. Your father embodies that. You are its purest expression. So what? Jack was crying now, tears and snot running down his face. You're going to kill me? That makes you better. I'm not going to kill you. Kang Seo stood and walked to the edge of the light. When he returned, he was carrying a laptop and a document folder. I'm going to give you a choice. He opened the laptop, turned it to face Jack. On the screen was a video cued to play. Malcolm Sterling in a private meeting, discussing bribes in explicit detail. Another video showed the San Pedro warehouse conditions. Another showed offshore accounts being funded through charitable donations. There were dozens of files. Your father's empire is built on exploitation, fraud, and casual cruelty, Kang Seo said. These documents prove it. Federal investigators want this evidence, but it's locked behind attorney-client privilege and corporate protections. They can't touch it. He opened the folder, revealing a sworn affidavit with blank spaces for a signature. Unless someone inside the family testifies, someone like a son who's seen everything, someone whose testimony carries weight. Jack stared at the affidavit. You want me to destroy my own father? I want you to choose. Kang Seo's voice was steady. In that restaurant, you chose to hurt someone because you could. Because your father's money made you think there were no consequences. Now, you get to choose again. Testify against the system that created you, or be consumed by it when federal investigators realize you signed off on corporate documents authorizing half of these crimes. I never signed. You did. Kang Seo produced another document, showing Jack's signature on a memorandum authorizing the San Pedro facility's operation. 3 years ago, when your father made you vice president of international operations. You don't read what you signed, do you? You just wanted the title. Jack's breathing became ragged. If I testify, my father will... Your father is finished either way, Kang Seo interrupted. The only question is whether you go down with him, or whether you choose to be something other than what he made you. And if I refuse? Kang Seo stood, closing the laptop. Then I release these documents to the press without your testimony. You face conspiracy charges as a corporate officer, and you spend the rest of your life learning what it's like to be powerless. The choice is yours, but you have until morning to make it. He walked toward the darkness, Phantom following. Wait! Jack's voice was desperate. Sandra, the waitress. Is she... Did she survive? Kang Seo paused at the edge of the light. She's alive, despite your father's attempt to murder her in her hospital bed. I didn't know he was going to... Jack stopped. The excuse died in his throat. He'd suggested it, had said Sandra needed to go away. The distinction between suggestion and execution felt suddenly meaningless. 8 hours, Kang Seo said. Think carefully. The light went out, and Jack Sterling was alone with his choices in the dark. When the sun rose over Los Angeles, 3 things happened in rapid succession. The first was that Jack Sterling, wearing clothes provided by his captors and accompanied by his own attorney, who'd been summoned by anonymous message, walked into the FBI's downtown office and requested to make a formal statement about Sterling Industries' criminal activities. So the second was that Malcolm Sterling was arrested at his Bel Air estate at 6:47 a.m. on charges of tax evasion, fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and human trafficking. His bail was set at $50 million. His assets were frozen pending investigation. The third was that Sandra Martinez, her burns healing beneath clean bandages, stood outside the restaurant where she'd been assaulted and discovered she now held the keys. Kang Seo had bought the building through one of his shell companies 3 months ago, long before Jack Sterling had entered the establishment. The previous owner had been eager to sell, never knowing who the real buyer was. Now Kang Seo stood beside Sandra, Phantom sitting calmly at his side, and explained the situation. The restaurant is being restructured as a worker cooperative, he said. Every employee will own an equal share. They'll elect their own management, set their own wages, make their own decisions. He handed her a document. They've already voted. You're the general manager. Sandra stared at the paper, her hands trembling. I don't understand. Why would you? Because I couldn't save my mother's restaurant, Kang Seo said simply. But I can save this one. And because you worked 3 jobs to keep your family alive, while people like Jack Sterling played at being royalty, that deserves more than survival. It deserves dignity. My brother, Sandra's voice caught. Marcus, he's really safe? He's enrolled in a community college program, full scholarship, housing included. He'll be fine. Kang Seo began to turn away, then paused. The burn scars will fade, but they won't disappear completely. I'm told there are excellent plastic surgeons who can help if you choose. The medical expenses are covered. Who are you? Sandra asked. Really? Kang Seo smiled slightly. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was the smile of someone who'd learned to carry darkness so others could live in light. I'm someone who remembers when they were powerless, and who decided that was enough. He walked away with Phantom at his side, disappearing into the morning crowds. Sandra watched him go, then looked down at the keys in her hand. Through the restaurant's window, she could see the other employees arriving, their faces showing the kind of hope that comes after long darkness. Inside, they'd begin erasing every trace of what the restaurant had been, a place where wealth bought permission to harm, and transforming it into something new. A place where dignity wasn't negotiable, where power was shared, where the people who worked the hardest kept the rewards. It wouldn't fix everything. It wouldn't erase what had happened. But it was a beginning. Sandra took a breath and unlocked the door. 6 months later, Kang Seo sat in his office watching the news. Malcolm Sterling had been convicted on 14 counts. Jack Sterling had received immunity in exchange for his testimony, but had been disowned by his family and lived now in a modest apartment in Silver Lake, working as a paralegal and, rumor said, attending therapy twice a week. The restaurant was thriving. Sandra had proven to be an excellent manager. More importantly, the cooperative model had attracted attention from labor organizers and journalists interested in alternative business structures. And 3 other restaurants in Los Angeles had adopted the model. Phantom's head rested on Kang Seo's knee. The PITBULL was getting older now, gray appearing around his muzzle, but his eyes were still sharp, still protective. There was a knock at the door. Kang Seo's assistant entered with a file. Another situation, she said quietly. Tech CEO in San Francisco. Systematic harassment of female employees. NDAs keeping them silent. He thinks his IPO makes him untouchable. Kong Seo took the file and began reading. Some things never changed. Every generation produced men who believed money was permission. Every generation needed reminders that it wasn't. Begin preliminary research, he said, and find out if he has any restaurants he frequents. The assistant smiled slightly and left. Phantom looked up at his master, waiting. Not yet, Kong Seo said, scratching behind the dog's ears. But soon. Outside, Los Angeles continued its eternal dance between light and shadow, between people who took and people who gave, between cruelty and justice. And in the spaces between, in the forgotten corners and overlooked moments, someone watched. Someone remembered. Someone kept the balance. Someone made sure that every action eventually had its consequence. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment telling us the part you loved the most and tell us where you are watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story has traveled.